Hello, readers. Today with us is Priyamvada Jaykumar, who is the author of The Man Who Fed India. Priyamvada, you have an incredible academic journey as well as you are a trained social psychologist.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Very, very pleased to be here. Bookscape is over here and looking forward to having a conversation on a man who freed India from hunger. If Mahatma Gandhi gave us freedom, MS Swaminathan gave us freedom from hunger. So let's roll.
So, the book The Man Who Fed India is not just a scientific record, but it's a narrative about Indian sovereignty and the man who turned a famine bowl into a bread basket, right? So there are many books on the Green Revolution, but yours is being hailed as the first human biography. What was the exact moment, perhaps during the 2020 lockdown, when you realized that the world knew the scientist but didn't knew the man?
I think mine is certainly, of course, as you said, mine is not the first book written about the Green Revolution. There were many books written on the Green Revolution,
Right.
on the lysine content of wheat, and the scientific propulsions behind it. But very few books look at the human story behind the Green Revolution, especially the political compulsions behind, this miracle which gave us freedom from that common plate of food. In fact, even today, if it is not an exaggeration to say if 1.4 billion or at least 1.5 billion people today have food on their plates, you only have MS Swaminathan to thank for that. Because if the 1960s, if we didn't get freedom from hunger, we would still be importing food from the United States at very, very difficult terms. I do not see the strangled hold of American politics lessening even today. But what he gave us was freedom to be politically sovereign. Because when you grow your own food, you can call your own shots. Because food at the end of the day is the ultimate currency of life. You can live without everything. You can live without an internet connection. You can potentially live without books. You cannot live without food.
So you mentioned that your original manuscript was about 770 pages. But
77, yeah.
77 pages. So
Big
what was
graphics,
the personal or very heartfelt thing that you have to trim so that it can come down to 300?
Actually, many interesting facets about the political compulsions behind the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution was, in a nutshell, India trying to hybridize their own wheat with Mexican wheat, for which we needed money. Now, India never really had money. In the 1960s, we had even less money. And that money could have gone to schools and hospitals, but we needed 5 crores to import 18,000 tons of seeds from Mexico, which in those times, and even today, is the largest seed shipment in history. And Mrs. Gandhi was on board because she was being bullied incessantly by the Americans. But MS Swaminathan needed political will to see that through, because the government can say anything, but unless you have the money to do it, you're not going to be able to import those seeds. Right. Because Mexico was selling those seeds to us. So it was very hard to leave out the more interesting bits and many other interesting bits that we came through. But 777 pages in a book is expecting a lot of any reader. So you had to make the book accessible, and you didn't want it to become a doorstop. I was very worried they'd turn it and, lock doors down or keep cupboards from slamming into you. So I wanted to make the book accessible, because non-fiction and biographies sometimes are daunting. I mean, HarperCollins tells me that non-fiction sells more than fiction, but that could be some non-fiction writer's, publisher's dream. But the point is, biographies have to be accessible, and sometimes accessibility is down to a number of pages, so it doesn't put you off.
So you made sure all the important things has at least
all the most important things which I couldn't live without were there. But if I could have had something else, I would have. Perhaps in the reprint, if I'm brave enough, I'll probably add a few more details, but not now.
That might give a different perspective also.
No, it'll actually fleshen out the perspective which is already there, and the book can bolster it further,
Right.
not reduce it.
So in your book, you made a powerful argument that this Green Revolution is the first Atmanirbharata, which is self-reliance.
No, the Green Revolution is, okay, today we hear a political term being bandied about everywhere. We're in Bharat Mandapam. It used to be originally called Pragati Maidan. You can change names, but you cannot change history. The first example of Atmanirbharta or self-reliance in India truly was the Green Revolution, because that was the first time we were able to grow our own food. Don't forget, in the 1960s, until the Green Revolution happened, we had to live a ship-to-mouth existence. Our food came from America at very, very costly terms, not in terms of money alone, in terms of conditional foreign policy and control as well. Mrs. Gandhi used to be told what she could talk about openly what policy she could follow against Pakistan, if she could take a stand against Vietnam. You don't want any country to do that to you, especially not for a woman like Mrs. Gandhi, who is very, very tough. But she had no choice. When you have to feed your country and your countrymen, you need to be able to listen to those who are giving you the food. So the point is, the biggest thing my learning was that until you had food security, you couldn't have had political sovereignty. So that was the greatest thing about this book.
So, as you said, Mrs. Indira Gandhi has been bullied for this import of seeds
Yes.
and all. So, how did Mr. Swaminathan look at himself? Like he is just a scientist in a lab, or he's a soldier fighting for India's sovereignty and freedom?
He was both. He was a soldier with the farmers on the. To me, he said his greatest foot soldiers were the farmers of India. And he was also a scientist because the first experiment that the seeds could work came from his laboratory. And then he took that experiment to the foot soldiers who were his farmers. So he was a bit of both. He was a scientist with, the valor and the drive of a soldier and the single-minded focus of getting the job done. You give a soldier a gun, he knows what he has to do. He won't leave his post. You gun him down, but the post is still left, is protected. So when you give the soldier a job to do, he does it. And that's exactly what he did.
I completely agree with you. He has done his both roles very well. He gave us the food, he also did his part to the country.
I think he also did something else. He brought agriculture out of the doom and gloom. He gave agriculture respectability.
True. We often refer him as the father of Green Revolution, but you highlight his role as a feminist, a conservationist, and a diplomat. Why was his focus on women in agriculture so ahead of his time? Is it the influence from his own family?
Well, it's a very interesting question, but let me counter your question with a question of my own. When I tell you, so when you think about a farmer, what's the first image which comes to your mind? You ask anybody, what is the first image which comes to your mind? Hello?
The first image is the land.
And who's on the land, man or woman?
More often is women in the village.
You're very smart. But more often you ask anybody, he knew where this question was going. I mean, I see jump my road like a politician. But you ask any layperson, they say, farmer, man and a bullock cart. But it's actually a woman. Most of the greatest work done in fields is done by women. The threshing, the carrying, the cutting, all of that is done by women. He grew up in a family where he realized very young, they lived in a joint family, and he saw his aunts and mothers slaving day in and day out, looking only after the children, cooking for them, cleaning after them. And he thought that this drudgery of everyday work had no financial compensation. And he often wondered to himself as a little boy, why couldn't women be given the same kind of opportunities as men? And that egalitarian upbringing later found manifestation in his own work when he started the Women in Farmers program when he was the International Rice Research Institute Director General in Manila, the first Asian of non-white origin to do it. And he then, when he was a nominated member of the Rajya Sabha in 2012, actually wanted to table a bill called the Women's Farmers Entitlement Bill. But he said he was too polite and too soft to fight with everybody else. Each time he opened his mouth to present the bill, 20 other members from the opposition would land up and say, we are not doing it. And he was too soft and quiet, and he said, okay. He said he was never able to table it. But that was one of the things he wanted to change, that at the end of the day, that the notion in India today changed, that not only are farmers men, they should actually are women, which also means that you give women land, titles, credit, access to credit facilities, because most deeds of land are held in the names of men. So when, they die, the benefits don't come to the women. So he wanted to change that, and he started that very, very young. Of course, your own background, it's always nature and nurture. Your own family background and the world you are born into, which shapes you ultimately. And his egalitarianism traces its roots well back into his childhood.
True. This has to be debated. Right, you recount a chilling moment in your book that Swaminathan was present at the Birla House when Gandhi was assassinated.
Yes.
Right. So was it the Gandhian influence that made his four-letter philosophy food?
The Gandhian influence actually philosophized his life, which is also four letters, L-I-F-E. And so is food, another four letters. His favorite four-letter word, if I turn around and say, is actually food. Mahatma Gandhi would come and live with them in their house because his father was the municipal chairman of the Kumbakonam Corporation. And he was a Gandhian. And he was a man who was a doctor who used to treat Dalits at his house. And he was well ahead of his time. So not just Mahatma Gandhi, Pandit Nehru, C. Raja Gopalachari, who was Rajaji.
Right.
from down south. They all stayed with him. So he grew up with freedom fighters. He was actually training to be a doctor when the Bengal famine struck. And it was Mahatma Gandhi's words that for the poor, God is bread. That changed his mind. He said India can have 2,000 farmers, doctors, but we need somebody to solve her problem, because for an agricultural country like India, the Bengal famine claimed up to 5 million lives. And it was not because it was a failed monsoon. It was because Winston Churchill diverted food away from Bengal. He said for an agricultural country to lose your people because you can't grow your own food was the greatest indignity for a nation. And at that stage, India was not a nation. We were still colonial. It was in 1942. The Quit India movement had just been launched by Mahatma Gandhi.
Right.
He dropped 2 years. He'd already spent 2 years planning to be a doctor. He dropped it immediately and took up agricultural sciences, and then changed the course of his life, and I think India's trajectory as well.
So, right now the world is facing again the food insecurity and the climate change. What if Mr. Swaminathan was present in 2026? What would be his biggest hope or biggest concern towards modern India farmers?
I think he oversaw the problems of modern Indian farming well before modern India woke up to it. Almost 40 years ago, he talked about the climate crisis. He was one of the first people in the world to talk about it. And in 1968, when he actually launched the Green Revolution, he turned around and said that I have a feeling it's going to be turning into the Green Revolution. So you have to have an ecological way of growing food, especially in a country or in the world where your land is shrinking. Land today has to be given to buildings, schools, a huge population upsurge. So your land for food is becoming smaller, but the mouths to feed are that much larger. So how do you marry this discrepancy? You need to grow your food in a sustainable manner. And that's why he started the notion of evergreen revolution. I think one of his greatest regrets, sadly, was the fact that he chaired the National Commission on Farmers. Right. Even today, you go and ask anybody, they will not know that it's called the National Commission on Farmers report. They will know it as the Swaminathan report. It's called the Swaminathan Commission report. You go and ask any farmer, this is नहीं तो वो तो National Commission नहीं है, वो तो Swaminathan जी का report है. The biggest upset of his life, and this was started by the UPA government, and then the NDA government, of course, is in power today. But no government has turned that into law. It was the one sure-shot way of giving farmers a livelihood based on what they grew. It was a C2 plus 50 formula, which would have given them money and would have given them a great amount of respectability and brought agriculture out of the doom and gloom. Don't forget, today, farmers don't want their children to be farmers. So if tomorrow all farmers have stopped producing children who want to become farmers, who's going to feed the nation? We haven't stopped growing. So his notion of as a conservationist was very, very valuable for growing food which was sustainable, because we are living on borrowed time. Tomorrow, in the next 40 years, we'll all go. But what we leave behind are going to be enormous problems for our children and their progenies and their generations to follow after. And until we turn the tide and make our livelihoods and our food security system more sustainable, we're looking down another path where we will need another revolution to help us out of this.
Right. So you have spent a considerate amount of 2 to 3 years in your book journey, spending time with the spirit of Mr. Swaminathan. Would like to know how's your journey, what is your experience?
I think writing a book is both a cathartic experience and also a journey where you find yourself. I couldn't have written this book without the support of my family, because don't forget, if it takes a village to raise a child, it takes an army to raise a book. And my army was my family, my husband, and my 3 children. I've got a 19-year-old daughter and 2 boys who are 14 and 12. We live in Singapore, but my husband and the children, they gave me no guilt. Women today can't achieve anything if they're not guilted. You always have somebody saying, Acha, now you're going on these book tours. Your husband is wifeless, your children are motherless, and you're going around. It's also not having a great time going from here to there. Of course, it's great. But as women, we're never allowed to enjoy our moment under the sun without guilt. But my husband never gave me guilt. He said, you do what you have to. You've given your life to your children. Now it is your turn. And I think this journey also taught me a lot about the fact that, you need family support for everything. You can't do it on your own. No man is an army. We're not silos. We're not islands. We need help. And where I needed stepping up, my family stepped up. HarperCollins was a fabulous publisher. They supported me too. And wherever I looked for help, I was grateful that I got help. And it's a journey in which I found myself, and I suspect I found my voice.
Right. So what is the one lesson from your uncle's life that you find yourself applying, or any of the readers should apply or consider?
That history only gives you one chance. and you have to take it. History gave him one shot, one chance meeting with Norman Borlaug, who was a Nobel laureate for peace, who had those magic seeds. Had he not had that meeting, had he not taken the seeds, we would still be begging America for food. So whenever history or life or opportunity give you one chance, take it. Because if you don't, somebody else will. So don't wait for that exact time, the right time. Today is the right time. Today is the right day. This is the right moment. Just grab it, and then you carry on. Though if you lose, if you fail, there's a lesson in that too. But take that opportunity. Life has to be lived, and I truly believe it is one life. You should do what your heart wants you to do, and you should do it with gusto and with the greatest amount of devotion. Because if you love something, go for it. There are no shortcuts to this.
So now readers, if you also want to find out how to grab that one chance, do read Mr. Swaminathan's The Man Who Fed India. And thank you very much, Ms. Priyamada.
Oh, thank you very much. This has been one of my nicest conversations with a smarter set of questions, even smarter than what LitFest asked me to do. So I'm thoroughly thrilled. This has been a great experience talking to you
honored.
guys. Thank you
Thank
guys.
you.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure
Thank
and
you.
privilege was all mine.
Same.
Thank you.